I've actually kind of taken a little break lately from doing a lot of writing. Um, and as you can probably tell, I'm more of a random creative person than maybe your typical writer, because I like to dabble in other things, in music and production and stuff like that. I'm still hoping that I learn, the every day at 7 a.m. thing or whatever. I haven't quite figured that out yet.
The voices of New Brunswick writers are the heart of Wordcraft, a podcast aimed at creating community through words. Wordcraft is a creation of the Writers Federation of New Brunswick, a nonprofit organization that helps New Brunswick writers to write, acquire skills, and showcase their talents to the world. The show is hosted and produced by Jenna Morton, with technical production by Tosh Taylor. The WFNB acknowledges that the land on which we live, work, and gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoq and Mi'kmaq peoples. We honor the spirit of our ancestors' treaties of peace and friendship. We acknowledge the support of the Canadian Council for the Arts.
Welcome to the second episode of Wordcraft, a podcast by the Writers Federation of New Brunswick. I'm your host, Jenna Morton. On this episode, we delve into the world of the mystical and musical Leo LaFleur. Leo is an award-winning writer from St. John. His critically acclaimed youth series, The Errand, is on reading lists around the world, and he's working to bring it to life on stage with an orchestra very soon. He's also at work on a nature landscape book in collaboration with photographer Mark Hemmings. Welcome to Wordcraft, Leo.
Thank you for having me. It is an honor to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to talk about your work and your craft. But first, I always like to kind of take it right back and start with, those early days and those early moments. When did you first feel like you were a writer? And when did you first really feel like the world was going to be open to accepting you as one?
Oh, those are big questions. I first started writing songs when I was about 13. And looking back, they were pretty good, I think. I didn't show anyone my songs at that time. I spent a lot of time in my room writing them, but not showing anyone. And so from there, I started a band in high school, but I still didn't show anyone my songs. And it wasn't until I hit my 30s that I started to kind of be brave and start showing people my work. But as a writer specifically, I didn't start writing until I was maybe in my late 20s, stories. And it was kind of a way to deal with mental health, actually, because I had gone through some really, difficult things, which is pretty common with creative people, I think. I had gone down the road of, kind of drugs and alcohol in high school and undealt with things. And, when I was in university, I was studying philosophy and great books. And I had, basically a complete mental breakdown that lasted for several years. And so basically, I have to give a shout out to mental illness to kind of getting me going and thinking about writing stories, because it was catharsis for me. I had met this incredible counselor. Her name's Kathleen. I'm kind of diving right away into the deep stuff, but so yeah, and she encouraged me to, I would send her emails and she would say, "This is amazing." And so I was getting that feedback. I had that person, that writers need, which I hadn't had up to that point, and I had no idea that I could actually, create stories in that way. I could always write songs, and I knew that, but this was a new thing, and so I kind of kept doing it, and then my friend Ashley suggested, I reach out to Sherry Fitch with this kind of novel I was working on. And I thought, this is crazy. She's never going to respond. And of course, she responded. She read it. She hooked me up with one of her editors. That particular novel, short novel, novella, didn't end up kind of going anywhere. As far as getting published goes, the Paris Review praised it, Goose Lane praised it, but it's kind of a weird thing that's difficult to market, I think, and it's really not fitting for the Paris Review anyway. I sent it there because I had to. So Kathleen kind of, she was my counselor and she got me going. And then Sherry Fitch, having that, this star, Canadian writer, say that your work is great meant a lot to me for sure. Kind of kept me going, even though I couldn't find a publisher at the time.
I have to say, I've read Sherry's liner notes, or her blurb on your book, The Errand, and
Yeah,
she's just, you can tell how in love she is with your writing, which is just fabulous. And so I think it's so important to have those moments, though, to talk about the impact that one person can have.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And she's a wonderful person. There were many emails between us, and she kind of put up with me. I was still not really in a good state mentally, and she was still very encouraging and very present, and that really kind of got me going, I would say. But Kathleen still, my counselor was kind of the most important person, but there are so many people that kind of, I'll never thank all of them because they're just, I have kind of a small list. But of course, there's the Writers Federation of New Brunswick, who's played, a role in supporting my work. Arts NB, Music NB, because we've created two musical scores for the first two books in the Aaron series, which Sherry Fitch wrote that blurb for. Um, and Canada Council is also in on that. Hilary Ladd, Chuck Teed, Greg Hemmings is the CEO of Hemmings House. He reads most of the stuff that I create now before I kind of send it out somewhere. Family and friends, of course, beta readers. Yeah, so many things. But yeah, I mean, starting out with mental health stuff, um, it really was kind of catharsis for me, and finding out that I kind of had that depth and that I had a way to express the things that I was going through, was really big for me, for sure. I was going through, depression, anxiety, double depression, narcissism, all the things that creative people kind of go through often in their lives. These are common things, by the way. But, I have, this kind of daily work that I get to do, where I get to be a part of, just being present for people who are going through that, because I had my family. I had this incredible counselor that I found, or that found me. And without those things, people end up in really, really tricky situations. And we don't think about the idea of choice. Um, and we don't think about that enough. These people have no choice, or if they do, it's not the same as most people. And without that supporting cast, I would have been much more of a train wreck than I was, and homeless, and kind of all those things. And so I'm very grateful for, the supporting cast that I had around me.
I think it's so important to have those conversations about, the supporting cast. I love the way that you phrase that. And, for me personally, I'll share that one of the things for me to get into the world of writing that I did was a workshop when I was in school, and
Mm.
an author came in and spoke to us, and I was like, oh, how do I get to do that? And from there on, everything kind of fell into place because of that moment. And I know you've been doing some workshops as well with students and children, and I'd love to
Yeah,
hear a little bit about what that interaction has been like for you.
for sure. And very cool that you get to have that moment, for sure. Um, but I've really just kind of started doing workshops. So we've been kind of building this project for the Imperial Theater, which is kind of on hold right now. There are some stage elements that haven't kind of quite worked out the way we wanted them to. But other elements have, that we're able to use for that I'm able to use for workshops. So we wanted to create something that had, elements of film, you know, and cinema, but was still largely a book, So it has musical scores that go with my words and the illustrations perfectly, and it's really written by Rachel Kidd. Um, and she is the director at Systema, and she is an incredible classical musician who puts up with me because I'm a musician, but I have zero training, and so I basically talk in gibberish, and she translates it, and she does it very well. Um, I mean, she is next level kind of creative genius, and I don't use that lightly. I don't know if I have the authority to say that, but I definitely believe that. Um, Very brilliant player, and yeah, she wrote the scores, and I had the privilege of producing them. And they go with my books. And Hemmings has created animation for those books. And Tyler Warren Ellis, kind of also was an animator for those books and put everything together. And he and I worked for hours. He's a nighthawk, so we weren't allowed to start until 8 p.m. and we would edit, the illustrations with the music and the animations until 3, 4, 5 in the morning, and it was awesome. And he's incredible too, Tyler Warren Ellis. He's a cinematographer in St. John. He works a lot with James Mullinger and and that side of things. But so yeah, we put that together, and so what I'm proud of about it is, the animations are very sparse, and the flow is very graceful, and from transitioning from one illustration to another, um, and so it allows the imagination to still breathe. And obviously, you're a fellow writer, so you're aware that this is a big problem in our culture and in our society, where we're not really engaging our minds in the art that we're consuming or the social media that we're consuming. And so obviously, I still love film, obviously, I want to be a part of even that in my life. We're actually thinking about, um, I've created a TV show, and we're going to be pitching it to Bell soon. So fingers crossed. And if Bell is listening, I hope you'll consider it. But
I've watched the promo clip that you've done with Hemmings House about this project you're working on, and it looks incredible. And I can't wait till you guys can finish figuring out these little pieces so that it does someday come to life for everyone.
So that actually is Tyler Warren Ellis who did that, and he was working on his own. But Hemmings House is a part of the project with regards to the animation. Just to give Tyler props for that.
Thank you for that. No, that's important work.
For
Yes.
sure.
Yeah,
For
no,
sure.
it is. It looks so interesting. And it kind of leads nicely to something that I've been thinking about. This series is about talking about, New Brunswick and New Brunswick creators and the role kind of back and forth, what that means to be in this place and how does it influence your work? Because a lot of people would look at what you create and it doesn't necessarily scream, oh, this was made in New Brunswick.
Mm,
And
mm.
so I'm wondering, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of New Brunswick that influences you in what you do as well. And so I'd love to hear
Oh,
you talk a
absolutely.
little bit about that.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, the people of New Brunswick, obviously, and the nature has had a huge impact. But you're right. I mean, when I started out writing, um, and even with the Aaron series, I wasn't gung ho about, my home province or representing it in any way, really. And maybe there was even something inside me that was against that. I was still rebelling, rebelling in some way, and wanting to be somewhere else, or wanting to be worldly, or all those things that young people go through. And uh, I actually started reading a lot of Steinbeck. Everything everything he writes, almost everything, is based in the Salinas Valley and based around his home. And even though he spent, the majority of the rest of his life in New York and other places, he was still writing about that. So I actually do write a lot about New Brunswick now. It's just not anything I've really broken through with yet. But I'm trying to publish a short story that's based in St. John right now. I'm getting good feedback, but no hits yet. I've recently created a book with Mark Hemmings, who's a local and international photographer. That's St. John landscapes, and it's kind of poetic prose. I call it poetry, and St. John landscapes, but with hints of the culture kind of woven in. And so yeah, I've come to value that kind of writing a lot. And I think Steinbeck kind of influenced that for sure and put that in my head. Um, and the politics here are really actually fascinating and easy to kind of, I mean, it's a storybook in itself, right? I mean, you can't make this stuff up, so it just goes right onto the page. And it's really remarkable in that way. And there are a lot of there are people like Sherry Fitch and David Adams Richards and a whole slew of other people that I would be ashamed that I don't know so many of them. Unfortunately, it's hard to keep track of everyone. But yeah, so many people kind of have definitely influenced me in that way.
You brought up the word representation and that idea that we don't always have to. I think sometimes we always think that, we have to say a place name in our work for it to be representative of this place, but it doesn't. Just the fact that you live here and create these things make them part of this place. And I think it's really great for, emerging writers and creatives to see the very different genres that you've dove into in your work already and know that, oh yeah, these things are of this place too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, you're right. And it all kind of, yeah, no matter, whether it's saying the name or not, I can think of like the example of nature that's influenced in or that, had an influence in my work and is represented, even though, like the trees, the basswoods and the elms and the lindens, another kind of basswood and the maples, they get in, and things like that are from very much from here, and and the evergreens, of course, too, and there's so many others, but so stuff like that gets in, or I'm sure within Rachel's writing of the music, even though there's obviously nothing explicitly stated that's New Brunswick in it, I'm sure there is, influences for her in the same way that kind of reached that stage. So I agree totally. And the same with the errand. And so, for me, a big thing is nature and trying, not necessarily succeeding, but trying to give it a depth, more of an old school depth, to appreciating nature in that way. This is a popular theme with writers for sure, and I feel that passionately. Um, because I remember my childhood and how important that was to me to be outside all day and just running through the woods and the shadows and the light and how that had an impact on my life. So if I can inspire someone to have that feeling or want to seek out that feeling more often, or be connected to it, through the writing, then it's a huge win. So that's a passionate thing for me.
I love that. Even just hearing you say those words, I'm like, oh yeah, I need to get outside. I haven't been outside today.
Right. So I went for a walk just before this meeting. That's my safe place.
It's it's really grounding and wonderful to stop and think about how much impact our words have on the people around us, and the greater sense of community that there really does exist among creative types. And I'm wondering if you could maybe give some thoughts to people who are maybe in this moment listening to us have this discussion because they're looking for some spark that they need, something to get them going on the next stage of what they're creating.
Learn to be okay with being hurt. Um, it's a big learning curve for me. We're sensitive people, we're creative people, and I went through the mental health stuff, and I mentioned I got really good help, and I'm kind of I'm a success story. I'm a rare success story in that way, because it's hard to find the right people to help us, and so I feel like I got through, and I'm very lucky, but. Um, in the creative process, I mean, even still, there are people who will blatantly tell me that, they think my work is terrible. And so, like you have to, um, you have to learn to kind of protect yourself in a way, but keep your heart open at the same time. Um, that you have to accept I mean, Leonard Cohen, famously said there's a lot of luck, involved in finding any kind of success, and I'm far away from, any kind of large success, but there's definitely been a lot of luck in everything that, my friend suggesting Sherry Fitch, and her ending up writing a blurb for our book before we had a publisher, and that obviously helped. And these things lining up like that are lucky. There's definitely luck involved in that. And before that, I met Adam Ohlers online. He's the illustrator, and he was um, and I owe a lot to Adam. He was an artist of the year in all of the UK and in the British Fantasy Awards. He was already established. He loved the first book in the Aaron series so much that I couldn't afford to pay him the $10,000 to $15,000 minimum it was going to cost to illustrate it. It's very poor, and still am mostly, just so you know. Uh, and uh, and so he asked his collectors to fund it, and that was a huge like how lucky am I to like they read the story and they're like, yeah, we'll get on board, and they funded it. And that was a huge deal for me to have that and to be working with such an incredible artist. And so another kind of layer of luck, like just kind of bumping into this guy online, reaching out to people. So there's that famous quote of fortune favors the bold, the brave. And I think that would be my advice, that, the more you are willing to embrace getting hurt and embrace kind of putting yourself out there, um, the luckier you might find yourself. Because that led to Sherry Fitch's blurb. And eventually it was a hard road. It was like a year. We created the book ourselves, made copies to send out and to sell a little bit. And it was maybe a year, and we were basically in despair. It wasn't going to happen. And then we found a publisher. And so we've been published internationally with the first three books. I'm working on the fourth now.
I love that. I didn't realize you had a fourth. That was going to be my next question before we kind of wrap things up is what's coming up? What are you working on that you can share about?
Yeah. So I am working on the fourth book slowly. And it's going to be, so the first three books are kind of very mysterious. They're kind of poetic fairy stories is what I kind of call them. And there's not a lot of kind of traditional detail. And what I wanted to create was this kind of thing that builds in mystery, and then you get rewarded with kind of more traditional detail down the road. And for some people they love that. Kids especially love that. And And it's kind of a mixed bag with adults that they open the book and they're like, "What? How come I don't know anything about the main character and the book's over?" But there are those out there that love it, and that's the kind of idea that we've had, kind of going with it, and uh, and so the fourth book is a lot more. It's going to be probably in the 15 to 20,000 word range, where the first three books are much less. And So that's the difference, and that's kind of something I'm working on now. I've actually kind of taken a little break lately from doing a lot of writing. Um, and as you can probably tell, I'm more of a random creative person than maybe your typical writer, because I like to dabble in other things, in music and production and stuff like that. I'm still hoping that I learn, the every day at 7 a.m. thing or whatever, I haven't quite figured that out yet, but I am starting. We got the grant for the third musical score for the third book. Rachel's going to start writing and I'm going to start producing, and we go through like this kind of crazy email process back and forth, and then I'll go to her studio and we'll talk about it. And then you know the first book, because it was kind of a new thing, I think it took a while to kind of lock in, um, months, and then for Rachel it clicked, and I was not really as necessary in the process anymore because she just kind of shot above me and was able to, I'm proud of the influence I get to have on it, and it's kind of this incredible thing for me because, music and particularly score writing is so out of my league. But as a storyteller, I get to kind of inject things in, and she is such a master at receiving information and and working in and listening. She's a really good listener. So I feel very privileged to kind of be a part of that. And she puts up with me, and that's also amazing because that's a thing for sure. But yeah, so those are things I'm working on, currently. Um, I'm working on finding publishers is also a writer's job, and also takes up a lot of our time, sending out emails and sending out, manuscripts and things like that. I'd still like to find a publisher for that novella that I wrote. I still send it out now and again. I think it's the best thing I wrote. So, um, so far, yeah. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Hey, thanks for having me. Normally I would ask you a bazillion questions, but it's just not set up that way. I really appreciate it. This is a real privilege for a writer to be able to talk about these things and to, be a writer in a public setting. We love that. So for good and for bad, but mostly good. So much appreciated.
Leo LaFleur is a St. John-based author, poet, musician, and more. You can find more about his acclaimed series, The Errand, on his website, www.leolafleur.com. Writers love to get out from behind our desks and spend time together. And coming soon is the perfect opportunity for that. WFNB's cozy and scaled down Autumn Writers Conference, Words Fall. This is where writers from all kinds of genres from all over New Brunswick and beyond will gather in one of our beautiful rural communities for workshops, social events, and opportunities to explore the host region together. Words Fall is taking place this year, 2024, in Sussex, New Brunswick, from October 25th through the 27th. You can join us for the whole weekend or just for a day and connect with your community and make progress on your writing goals. There are workshops for writers of all genres, all skill levels. For more information or to register right now for your spot for Words Fall or the next Writers Retreat, see our upcoming events at wfnb.ca/events. Coming up on the next episode of WordCraft, I'll speak with Len Falkenstein, Director of Drama at the University of New Brunswick, Artistic Director of Notable Acts Theatre Company, and Fredericton's Bard in the Barracks.
WordCraft is a project by the nonprofit Writers Federation of New Brunswick. The show is hosted and produced by Jenna Morton, with technical production by Tosh Taylor. We acknowledge the support of the Canadian Council for the Arts. The Writers Federation of New Brunswick acknowledges that the land on which we live, work, and gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoq and Mi'kmaq peoples. We honor the spirit of our ancestors' treaties of peace and friendship.